I watched from my kitchen window as Karen loaded my jet ski onto her trailer. The same jet ski she had claimed was an environmental hazard just 3 days earlier. The same jet ski she had convinced the police to confiscate from my own private lake. The same jet ski she was now planning to use for her weekend lake party. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop and accessed the remote monitoring system. Corinne had no idea what she had stolen. She thought she had won this battle through manipulation and lies. She thought she could destroy my peace and steal my property without consequences. But as I watched her drive away with my pride and joy, a cold smile spread across my face. Corinne was about to learn that some people fight back in ways she never expected. And when she took that jet ski out on the water this weekend, she was going to get the surprise of her life. After 23 years of saving every penny and working double shifts, I finally bought my dream property. 47 acres of rolling hills, mature oak trees, and the crown jewel that made it all worthwhile, a pristine 3-acre private lake. The moment I signed those papers, I knew my life had changed forever. The ranch house sat on a gentle slope overlooking the water. Every morning I would sit on my back porch with coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the lake's surface gold. The stress of city life melted away with each passing day. This was not just property. This was my sanctuary. The jet ski was my weekend reward for all those years of sacrifice. A sleek black and silver machine that could cut through the water like a knife. Saturday mornings became sacred to me. I would launch from my private dock, feel the engine roar to life beneath me, and race across the lake with nothing but open water and endless sky ahead. The Willowbrook Ranch community had seemed perfect when I moved in. The HOA was small and reasonable. Basic rules about property maintenance and keeping the neighborhood looking respectable. Nothing too demanding. I was happy to comply. I wanted to be a good neighbor. For the first 6 months, life was everything I had dreamed it would be. I fixed the fence line, painted the barn, kept my grass trimmed, and even upgraded my mailbox to match the community standards. My neighbors were friendly. We waved when we passed each other on the country roads. Everything was peaceful. Then Karen moved into the neighborhood. Karen Martinez arrived with the energy of someone who had big plans. She was in her early 50s, always perfectly dressed, and spoke with the confidence of someone who expected to be listened to. She introduced herself as a former city planning commissioner who wanted to bring professional standards to our little community. Within 2 months, she had been elected HOA president. Her campaign focused on elevating property values and creating a more prestigious neighborhood. It sounded reasonable enough. Most of us wanted our investment to grow in value. Corinne started with friendly visits to each property owner. She would arrive with a clipboard and a bright smile, walking around your land and offering suggestions for improvements. When she visited my ranch, she complimented the house and the beautiful lake view. "You have such a unique property," she said, gazing out at the water. "The lake really makes this place special. Of course, we will need to make sure everything stays up to community standards." I nodded and smiled. Of course, I want to do my part. Corinne made notes on her clipboard as she walked around my property. She paused when she saw the jet ski at the dock. Her expression shifted slightly, but she quickly recovered her smile. "That is quite a recreational vehicle you have there," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "We will need to discuss the aesthetic impact of such items. Some people find them unsightly." Something cold settled in my stomach. The way she said unsightly made it clear this was not a casual observation. This was a warning. "The jet ski stays at my private dock on my private lake," I said carefully. I did not think that would be an issue. Karen's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. Everything in our community affects property values. We all need to think about the bigger picture. As she walked back to her car, I stood at my dock and looked out at the lake. For the first time since moving to my dream property, I felt a shadow of doubt. Karen's words echoed in my mind. The way she had looked at my jet ski, my lake, my entire setup, it was not the look of someone making suggestions. It was the look of someone making plans. The first violation notice arrived 2 weeks later. Mailbox height noncompliance. According to Karen's measurement, my mailbox was 3 inches too tall. I measured it myself and found it was exactly within the specifications listed in the original HOA documents. But Karen had updated the rules. I adjusted the mailbox height and thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The second notice came a week later. Grass length violation. My front yard grass was allegedly too long in some areas. I had mowed it just 3 days earlier, but I mowed it again. Then came the fence paint violation, the barn trim color violation, the driveway maintenance violation. Each notice was official, typed on HOA letterhead, and demanded immediate compliance. Each one cost me time and money to address. I started to see the pattern, but I kept hoping Karen would eventually be satisfied. During this campaign of petty complaints, I noticed Karen making regular visits to other neighbors. She would park her car and spend 30 minutes at each house, clipboard in hand, talking earnestly with whoever answered the door. She was building her case house by house. Mrs. Patterson from down the road stopped by one afternoon with a concerned expression. "I wanted to warn you," she said quietly. "Karen came by asking questions about your jet ski. She said it was creating noise pollution and disturbing the peace. I told her I never heard anything, but she kept pushing." My blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know if I had ever seen you riding it early in the morning or late at night. She asked if the engine noise bothered me. When I said no, she started talking about property values and how recreational vehicles can hurt everyone's investment." I thanked Mrs. Patterson for the warning, but the damage was already done. Karen was conducting a systematic campaign to turn my neighbors against me. She was planting seeds of doubt and concern where none had existed before. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer when I overheard Karen talking to the Hendersons at the community mailbox. I had walked down to get my mail and heard her voice carrying across the parking area. "That lakefront property is absolutely perfect for what I have in mind," she was saying. "Once I can convince them to sell, I will turn it into the centerpiece of our community, a proper lake house with appropriate recreational facilities." My hands clenched around my mail. Karen did not just want to control my property, she wanted to own it. I started complying with every single demand she made. I spent hundreds of dollars on unnecessary improvements. I changed paint colors, adjusted fence heights, and modified landscaping. I documented every expense and every compliance measure. I was determined to prove that I was a cooperative community member. But Karen's frustration grew with each successful compliance. The more I followed her rules, the more arbitrary and ridiculous her demands became. She was not interested in community standards. She was looking for an excuse to force me out. The breaking point came when Karen issued a formal complaint about my jet ski specifically. The official notice claimed that personal watercraft violated the community's aesthetic standards and could negatively impact property values for all residents. I stared at the notice in disbelief. My jet ski was kept at my private dock on my private lake. It was not visible from any public road or neighboring property. The only way anyone could even see it was by trespassing on my land. That evening, I called the county office to research the exact property boundaries and HOA authority. What I discovered made my anger burn even hotter. Karen had no legal authority over my private lake or what I kept on my own property. She was making demands she had no right to make. But I also realized that legal authority did not matter if she could convince enough neighbors to support her position. She was not just targeting my jet ski. She was targeting my entire way of life. I sat on my back porch that night, looking out at the lake that had brought me so much peace. The jet ski bobbed gently at the dock, reflecting the moonlight on the water. This was my sanctuary. This was what I had worked my entire adult life to achieve. Karen wanted to take it all away from me, and she was willing to lie, manipulate, and abuse her position to do it. I made a decision that night. I was done being the compliant neighbor. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. Karen escalated beyond the HOA the following Monday. I found official county paperwork in my mailbox claiming that my jet ski violated local watercraft regulations and environmental protection standards. Karen had filed formal complaints with 3 different government agencies. I spent the entire day on the phone with county officials, explaining that I owned a private lake and operated my jet ski entirely on my own property. Every single agency confirmed that I was in full compliance with all regulations. Personal watercraft on private property required no permits or special approvals. But Karen was not finished. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for the following week. The official notice claimed that immediate action was needed to address environmental concerns and property value impacts related to recreational watercraft in the community. I knew this was my chance to fight back with facts and documentation. I prepared a comprehensive presentation showing that all my activities were completely legal and that my property was private. I gathered letters from neighbors confirming that my jet ski created no noise or disturbance issues. The meeting was held at the community center on a Thursday evening. 23 property owners attended. Karen stood at the front of the room with a presentation board covered in official-looking documents and photographs. "We are here tonight to discuss a serious threat to our community standards," Karen began. "Unregulated recreational watercraft usage is creating environmental hazards and diminishing property values for all residents." She had photographs of my jet ski taken from various angles. She had printed copies of environmental impact studies that had nothing to do with private lakes. She had prepared charts showing property value trends in communities with and without watercraft restrictions. It was an impressive presentation. It was also completely fabricated. When Karen finished, I stood up to present my evidence. I explained the legal boundaries of private property. I showed the official letters from county agencies confirming my compliance with all regulations. I presented the neighbor testimonials stating that my jet ski caused no problems. The room was divided. About half the neighbors seemed convinced by my documentation. The other half appeared swayed by Karen's fear-mongering about property values and environmental damage. Karen's allies on the HOA board were vocal in their support. Board member David Chen spoke about the need for proactive community leadership and protecting everyone's investment. Board member Sarah Williams talked about setting precedents for responsible property management. It became clear that this was not really about my jet ski. This was about establishing Karen's authority to control any aspect of community life she chose to target. If she could force me to remove my jet ski from my private lake, she could control anything. After 2 hours of debate, the board voted to study the issue further and seek additional legal counsel before making a final decision. It was a delay tactic, but it bought me time to prepare for the next phase of Karen's campaign. I consulted with a property rights attorney the following week. The lawyer was clear and direct about my legal position. She has no authority over your private lake or what you do on your own property, he said. The HOA can regulate what is visible from common areas or public roads, but they cannot control private recreational activities on private property. But he also gave me a warning that chilled me to the bone. The problem is that legal authority does not always match practical reality. If she can convince law enforcement that you are violating some regulation, they might act first and ask questions later. And if she has political connections or can present a convincing case, you could find yourself fighting an uphill battle even when you are legally right. His words proved prophetic sooner than I expected. Karen's final move in this phase came as a personal threat delivered to my front door. She arrived alone on a Sunday evening, her usual bright smile replaced by a cold, calculated expression. "I tried to handle this through proper channels," she said without any pleasantries. "But you seem determined to be difficult. I want you to understand something very clearly. I will have that lakefront property one way or another. You can sell it to me voluntarily, or I can make your life so miserable that you will be desperate to leave." I stared at her, finally seeing Karen's true nature completely exposed. "Are you threatening me?" "I am explaining reality," she replied calmly. "There are other ways to handle non-compliant residents, ways that do not require HOA board votes or community meetings. If you think you can fight me using rules and regulations, you are about to learn how wrong you are." She turned and walked back to her car without another word, leaving me standing in my doorway with a sick feeling in my stomach. That night, I could not sleep. I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the lake, knowing that Karen was planning something beyond legal channels. She had made it clear that she was willing to escalate this conflict to levels I had never imagined. I had no idea how right I was. The police cars arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. 2 patrol vehicles and Karen's silver SUV formed a convoy in my driveway. I was drinking coffee on my back porch when I saw them coming up the dirt road, and my heart immediately started racing. Karen emerged from her vehicle with a folder full of official-looking documents and that same cold smile she had worn during our confrontation. She was dressed in her best business attire, clearly prepared for a performance. Officer Martinez approached my porch while Officer Johnson hung back near the patrol cars. "Sir, we have received reports of an abandoned watercraft that may be creating environmental hazards. We need to inspect the property and potentially remove the vehicle for proper disposal." I set down my coffee cup, my hands trembling slightly. "Officer, there is no abandoned watercraft on my property. I own a jet ski that I keep at my private dock on my private lake. I have all the documentation right here." Karen stepped forward with her folder. "Officers, as HOA president, I have been monitoring this situation for months. The watercraft has been sitting unused for extended periods, leaking fuel and oil into the lake water. We have documented evidence of environmental damage." My blood pressure spiked. "That is completely false. I use my jet ski every weekend and it has never leaked anything. This is my private property and that woman has no authority here." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable but continued with his official tone. "We need to see the registration and proof of ownership for the watercraft. We also need to inspect it for environmental compliance." I ran inside to get my documentation. Registration papers, purchase receipt, insurance information, property deeds showing the lake boundaries. Everything was in perfect order. I brought it all back to the porch and handed it to the officer. While Officer Martinez reviewed my paperwork, I watched Karen whisper urgently to Officer Johnson. She was showing him photographs and pointing toward the lake. Her body language was that of a concerned citizen reporting a serious environmental crime. "The registration appears to be in order," Officer Martinez said, handing my documents back. "But we still need to inspect the watercraft based on the environmental concerns that have been reported." We walked down to the dock, and I felt my world starting to crumble. Karen had staged this perfectly. She had official complaints, environmental concerns, and two police officers who were treating her like a credible witness instead of the manipulative liar she actually was. At the dock, my jet ski sat exactly where it always did, clean and well-maintained. There were no fuel leaks, no oil stains, no environmental damage of any kind. But Karen was ready for this too. "You can see the discoloration in the water around the dock," she said, pointing to some natural algae growth that had nothing to do with my jet ski. "And notice how the watercraft is positioned in a way that blocks natural water flow patterns." I wanted to scream. Everything she was saying was complete nonsense, but she said it with such authority and conviction that I could see the officers taking her seriously. Officer Johnson walked around the dock area, taking notes and photographs. "Ma'am, do you have documentation of the environmental damage you mentioned?" Karen produced a folder full of printed materials that looked official, but were clearly generic environmental studies pulled from the internet. "I have been working with environmental specialists to document the ongoing damage. The recommendation is immediate removal of the contamination source." That was when I realized what was happening. This was not an environmental inspection. This was a theft disguised as law enforcement action. "Officers, I need to be very clear about something," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "That woman wants to buy my property. She has been harassing me for months with false HOA violations. This is not about environmental protection. This is about her trying to force me to sell my land." Karen's expression shifted to one of hurt innocence. "That is a very serious accusation. I am simply trying to protect our community's natural resources. If this gentleman has a personal vendetta against me, that does not change the environmental facts." The officers exchanged glances. I could see them making a decision, and I knew it was not going to go in my favor. "Sir, we are going to need to impound the watercraft pending a full environmental assessment," Officer Martinez said. "You can retrieve it once the county environmental office completes their evaluation." My heart sank. How long will that take? Could be several weeks, depending on their schedule. I watched in horror as Karen's triumphant smile spread across her face. She had won. She had manipulated law enforcement into stealing my property using completely fabricated environmental concerns. The officers called for a trailer to transport my jet ski. As we waited, I made one last desperate attempt to reason with them. "Please, just call the county environmental office right now. They will tell you that I am in full compliance with all regulations. This is all documented." But Karen was ready for this too. The environmental damage assessment requires specialized equipment and trained technicians. It cannot be done with a simple phone call. 45 minutes later, my jet ski was loaded onto a county trailer and driven away. Karen shook hands with both officers and thanked them for their prompt response to this environmental emergency. As the convoy disappeared down my dirt road, I stood alone at my empty dock, staring at the water where my jet ski should have been. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. Law enforcement had sided with a liar and a thief against an honest property owner with all the correct documentation. That evening, I called the county environmental office to find out when I could expect my jet ski to be returned. The conversation destroyed what little hope I had left. "Sir, there is no environmental assessment scheduled for your watercraft. We have no record of any environmental complaint or impoundment request. You might want to check with the HOA about getting your property back." I hung up the phone and walked out to my dock. The empty boat lift and bare dock looked like a crime scene. Karen had not just stolen my jet ski. She had stolen it using police officers as her accomplices. But as I stood there in the gathering darkness, one more devastating realization hit me. Karen had not impounded my jet ski for environmental assessment. She had taken it for herself. And tomorrow was Saturday, her usual day for entertaining guests by the lake. She was going to use my own jet ski to celebrate her victory over me. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, consumed by rage and determination to understand exactly who I was dealing with. If Karen thought she could destroy my life with lies and manipulation, she was about to learn that two could play that game. I started with basic internet searches about Karen Martinez and her history in the area. What I found made my blood run cold. This was not Karen's first rodeo. She had been involved in similar property disputes in her previous neighborhood, and the pattern was always the same. Target a vulnerable property owner. Create harassment through official channels. Escalate to involve law enforcement or government agencies. Force a sale through legal pressure or outright intimidation. Then purchase the property at below market value for herself or her associates. The deeper I dug, the more victims I found. A retired teacher forced to sell her family farm after Karen orchestrated a zoning complaint campaign. A small business owner driven into bankruptcy by endless regulatory challenges that Karen had initiated through her city planning connections. Karen was not just a controlling HOA president. She was a predator who used her knowledge of bureaucratic systems to destroy people's lives for personal profit. But I also discovered something else during my late-night research session, something that would change everything. My jet ski was not just a recreational vehicle. It was a high-end model with advanced smart technology that I had barely explored. GPS tracking, remote monitoring, wireless diagnostics, and even limited remote control capabilities for security purposes. I had purchased the extended technology package 2 years earlier, but never bothered to set up most of the advanced features. Now, sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, I realized I might have the perfect weapon for fighting back. The setup process took me 4 hours, but by sunrise, I had full access to my jet ski's location, status, and operating systems through my smartphone and laptop. The GPS tracker showed that my jet ski was currently located at Karen's property, confirming what I already suspected. She had not turned it over to any environmental office. She had taken it straight to her own dock. Over the next 3 days, I watched Karen's activity patterns through the GPS tracking system. She took my jet ski out every morning for 30-minute rides around the lake. She was not storing it for environmental assessment. She was using it as her personal recreation vehicle. The hypocrisy was staggering. The same woman who had claimed my jet ski was an environmental hazard was now using it daily on the same lake she said it was polluting. The same woman who said recreational watercraft were unsightly was now flaunting my stolen property in front of the entire neighborhood. But Karen's hypocrisy was about to become the least of her problems. I spent Thursday afternoon consulting with my attorney about the theft and the fraudulent police report. The legal news was both good and bad. "What happened to you was completely illegal," the attorney said. "The police seizure was based on false information, and the environmental claims were fraudulent. You have grounds for criminal charges against Karen and potentially civil rights violations against the police department." But then came the bad news. However, prosecuting this case could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. And even if you win, recovering damages might be difficult. Plus, if Karen has been doing this for years, she probably has connections and resources that could make your life very difficult during the legal process. The attorney paused and looked at me seriously. "There is one more thing you need to know. If Karen keeps your jet ski for 30 days and can document that it was abandoned or improperly stored, she might be able to claim adverse possession rights under certain circumstances. The clock is ticking." I left the law office with a decision to make. I could fight this through legal channels and spend years in court, or I could take matters into my own hands while I still had the opportunity. That evening, I sat on my empty dock and opened the remote monitoring app on my phone. Karen's location data showed that she was planning something special for the weekend. She had invited several HOA board members and neighbors for a lake party on Saturday afternoon. She was going to celebrate her victory by hosting a party featuring my stolen jet ski as the main entertainment. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Karen had not just stolen my property. She had stolen it to humiliate me in front of the entire community. She wanted everyone to see her riding my jet ski, knowing that I was powerless to stop her. But as I stared at the remote control interface on my phone, a cold smile spread across my face. Karen had made one critical mistake in her perfect plan. She had stolen a jet ski that I could control remotely, and she had no idea what was coming for her. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect weather for a lake party. I positioned myself at my bedroom window with binoculars and my laptop, watching Karen's property across the lake. By 2 o'clock, cars were arriving for her celebration. Board members, neighbors, and several people I did not recognize gathered on her deck overlooking the water. Karen made quite a show of preparing my jet ski for her guests. She wore a bright red life jacket and designer sunglasses, posing for photos beside my stolen property like she was some kind of water sports champion. The laughter and conversation carried across the lake as she explained to everyone how she had saved the community from environmental damage. I opened the remote monitoring app on my laptop and checked all systems. GPS location confirmed. Engine diagnostics normal. Remote access enabled. All safety protocols active and ready for manual override. Karen climbed onto my jet ski and fired up the engine. The familiar sound of the motor carried across the water, but instead of bringing me joy, it filled me with cold determination. She had stolen my sanctuary. Now she was going to learn what that really cost. She started with slow circles near the shore, showing off for her audience. I watched through the binoculars as she waved to her guests and accelerated into wider turns. She was clearly enjoying herself, probably thinking about how clever she had been to manipulate the police into stealing my property for her. I waited. Patience was critical for what I had planned. After 15 minutes of showing off near the shore, Karen opened up the throttle and headed for the center of the lake. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She was now roughly 300 yards from shore, far enough that swimming back would be a real challenge. I activated the remote override system. The first thing that happened was the engine cut out completely. Karen's triumphant ride across the lake suddenly became a dead drift in the middle of the water. Through the binoculars, I could see her confusion as she tried to restart the engine. She pressed the ignition button repeatedly, but nothing happened. The remote override had disabled all normal operating systems. But the engine shutdown was just the beginning. The jet ski's ballast system was designed for stability and safety, with the ability to take on controlled amounts of water in emergency situations. I had found the manual override controls buried deep in the smart system's advanced settings. I activated the ballast intake. Water began flowing into the jet ski's hull through the safety intake valves. It was a slow process, designed to prevent accidental sinking, but it was steady and unstoppable once activated. Karen's confusion turned to concern as she noticed the jet ski sitting lower in the water. She tried the ignition again, then checked around the seat for some kind of manual override. She had no idea that her problem was not mechanical failure. It was technological revenge. Through the binoculars, I could see her growing panic as the water level rose around the jet ski's body. She was no longer sitting on a recreational vehicle. She was sitting on a slowly sinking boat in the middle of a lake, with no way to control what was happening. The guests on Karen's deck had noticed the problem. I could see people pointing and gathering at the shore. Someone was shouting across the water, but Karen was too far away to hear clearly. The jet ski was now sitting dangerously low in the water. Karen had realized that her situation was becoming genuinely dangerous. She stood up on the seat, trying to keep her feet dry while frantically attempting to restart the engine. But the remote override would not be defeated by desperate button pushing. One of Karen's guests had launched a small fishing boat and was heading toward her position. The rescue was taking longer than expected because the helper had to start his boat and navigate carefully across the lake. Karen's designer sunglasses fell into the water as she lost her balance. Her perfect hair was now disheveled from panic and exertion. The woman who had looked so triumphant and in control just 30 minutes earlier was now standing on a sinking jet ski in the middle of a lake, soaked and desperate. The fishing boat reached Karen just as the jet ski's deck went completely underwater. She had to jump into the lake and swim to her rescuer, leaving my jet ski to complete its programmed sinking sequence in the middle of the lake. I watched through the binoculars as Karen was pulled into the fishing boat, dripping wet and shivering. Her lake party had turned into a public humiliation in front of all the people she had been trying to impress with her stolen prize. The fishing boat brought Karen back to shore, where she stood on her own dock looking like a drowned rat. Her party guests gathered around her with towels and concerned questions, but I could see the embarrassment and rage in her body language even from across the lake. Through my laptop, I could see that the jet ski had settled on the lake bottom in about 12 feet of water. The GPS beacon was still active, and all the sinking protocols had worked exactly as designed. The smart system would preserve the engine and electronics while making the jet ski appear to be completely destroyed. Karen stood on her dock, wrapped in a towel, staring out at the spot where my jet ski had disappeared beneath the surface. Her perfect theft had turned into a perfect disaster, and she had no idea how or why it had happened. As I closed my laptop and put away the binoculars, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I had experienced in months. Karen had used lies and manipulation to steal my property. Now she would have to explain to everyone why the jet ski she had claimed was environmentally dangerous had sunk during her own joyride. But the best part was yet to come, because Karen was about to discover that sinking someone else's property carries serious legal consequences, especially when you stole it in the first place. Karen's furious phone call to the police came exactly 1 hour after her humiliating rescue from the lake. I was back at my kitchen window, watching the second convoy of patrol cars arrive at her property that weekend. This time, she was the one standing on her porch trying to explain what had happened. I could not hear the conversation, but I could see Karen's animated gestures as she pointed toward the lake and waved her hands dramatically. She was clearly trying to convince the officers that my jet ski had been sabotaged, that someone had deliberately caused it to sink during her ride. The officers took notes and looked out at the lake where the jet ski had disappeared. Then they walked back to their patrol cars and made some phone calls. After about 30 minutes, they returned to Karen's porch for another conversation. This time, Karen's gestures were less animated and more defensive. My phone rang an hour later. It was Officer Martinez, the same officer who had impounded my jet ski just 4 days earlier. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions about your watercraft. The person who was using it reports that it malfunctioned and sank. Do you know anything about mechanical problems with the jet ski?" I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully. "Officer, I was not aware that anyone had permission to use my jet ski. As far as I know, it was impounded for environmental assessment by the county office." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, can you come down to the station? We need to discuss this situation in detail." At the police station, the truth finally came out. The county environmental office had no record of my jet ski impoundment. There had been no environmental assessment request. The seizure from my property had been based on fraudulent complaints and false documentation. Officer Martinez looked genuinely embarrassed as he explained the situation. "It appears that Ms. Martinez misrepresented the nature of the environmental concerns and the county's involvement in the impoundment process. We are investigating potential charges for filing false police reports and fraudulent use of government authority." But the legal consequences for Karen were just beginning. The district attorney's office was very interested in Karen's pattern of behavior. My case was not the first time she had used false complaints and government agencies to harass property owners. The prosecutor assigned to the case explained that Karen was facing multiple felony charges related to fraud, theft, and abuse of official position. "Your jet ski incident was the final piece of evidence we needed to establish a clear pattern of criminal behavior," the prosecutor told me. "We have been building a case against Ms. Martinez for months based on complaints from other property owners." The HOA board met in emergency session and voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position as president. They also voted to reverse all the targeted rule changes she had implemented, including the watercraft restrictions she had tried to impose on my property. But the sweetest justice came from the community itself. Word spread quickly about what Karen had really been doing. Neighbors who had supported her property value arguments now realized they had been manipulated by someone with criminal intentions. Mrs. Patterson stopped by to apologize for not speaking up sooner. "We all knew something was wrong with how she was targeting you, but none of us wanted to get involved. I am sorry we did not support you when you needed it." 3 weeks later, professional divers recovered my jet ski from the lake bottom. The smart system's water protection protocols had worked perfectly. After a thorough cleaning and system reset, it was completely functional and ready to return to service. I spent that first weekend back on the water reflecting on everything that had happened. Karen's criminal trial was still pending, but she had already been forced to pay restitution for the theft and fraud charges. More importantly, the entire community now understood the difference between legitimate concerns and predatory manipulation. As I rowed across the lake that had been my sanctuary for so long, I realized that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to fight back using every tool at your disposal. Karen had tried to destroy my peace through lies and corruption, but in the end, her own greed and arrogance had been her downfall. The lake was quiet again. My dock was no longer empty, and Karen Martinez was facing years in prison for underestimating the wrong neighbor. Sometimes justice comes through the courts, sometimes it comes through technology, and sometimes it comes from standing up for yourself when everyone else is too afraid to fight back. My jet ski and I were both exactly where we belonged,